أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Let us begin our discussion this evening by remembering Imam al-Hussein, by renewing our allegiance to Imam al-Hussein and pledging our allegiance to the values of Imam al-Hussein. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. We concluded our discussion last night on feminism, and I was alluding to certain strands and some examples of feminism. We said last night that feminism as an ideal advocates for the rights of women within a certain society. But feminism itself is not just an ideal, it is also a movement. And as a movement, it advocates for particular issues, for particular rights within the society. And as a movement, and not as an ideal, it is a response to the existing conditions. And therefore, I was trying to point out that it is only relevant within a particular context as a movement, and it is sometimes limited to that particular context. And I gave you some examples. I said, for example, one of the issues that women in Canada faced, in particular Aboriginal women, was that their children were taken away from them. Feminism as an ideal would advocate for their rights, but feminism as a movement up until the 90s did not advocate for their rights. Now, my purpose in pointing this out was not to dissuade anybody from advocating for the rights of women or for the rights of men in society. I think we have to be very vocal about it. And as a community, we should be the ones to advocate for the rights of women and even for men within the society. Because what happens is when we're not vocal, when we're not the ones who are advocating, you can be sure that there are others who will be doing that. There are others who will advocate for their rights. And they might find their rights outside the community. They might find a place of belonging outside the community. And they may not advocate with those values that we have. They may advocate with beliefs which are not our beliefs. And therefore, it's important for us to be vocal about it. We also did not go deeply into another discussion last night. And it's a discussion which is a fundamental discussion, because it gives rise to two different paradigms. As Muslims, do we advocate for equality and to have the same rights? Or do we advocate for fairness and justice based on different but similar rights, roles, and responsibilities as well? What we were trying to point out last night, though, is not the fact that we should not be advocating. We were very clear about that we should be advocating, but that we should have an authentic form of what we are advocating. That what we are advocating for should be based on the teachings of the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And we'll end that discussion over there for now. Today, I want to have an important discussion about an area of growth within the Muslim community. And it is perhaps a very sensitive discussion and sometimes a very difficult discussion for us to have. And that area is political engagement by a Muslim community within the society in which it lives. There are many political issues that affect the Muslim community. Islamophobia and Islamophobic rhetoric coming from political leaders does affect our community and members of our community. It affects us in terms of violence, it affects us in terms of discrimination, but most importantly, it affects our ability to practice our faith and to be proud of our faith. And we have so many examples now of women wearing hijab, being discriminated against or being abused physically and verbally. We have examples of men with beard or men offering their salat or a group of men offering their salat in jama'ah and facing discrimination or violence because of doing that. There are many other issues that affect the Muslim community as well. Education. When we send our children to school, not only are they taught material, but they're also taught certain values. And these values are ingrained into them from a very young age. Now, obviously, I would be advocating that we need to have our own schools, and we need to build our own schools. But the fact of the matter will remain that a lot of families in the Muslim community are going to send their children to public schools, and there they are going to be taught certain values which may not necessarily be in line with the values of Islam. Security issues as well affect the Muslim community. When you have anti-terrorism legislation, which you have in America and we have in Canada, well, it does affect the civic rights of the Muslim community. You find that the Muslim community, Islamic centers, individuals come under greater scrutiny by government officials, by government institutions, and law enforcement as well. And that sometimes the civic rights of individuals within the Muslim community and Muslim communities as a whole is trampled upon. Foreign affairs as well. As Muslims, we're always concerned about the state of our brothers around the world. We're concerned about our brothers who are in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Iraq, and our brothers and sisters who are living in Palestine as well. And we also recognize that the countries in which we live, their foreign policies are sometimes directly responsible for the political situations that exist within those lands. Therefore, you will agree with me that there are a number of political issues that do affect us as individuals and affect us as a Muslim community. What is shameful within the Muslim community is that sometimes when there are bills and policies being passed which will target and affect the Muslim community, it is not the Muslim community that stands up for its rights. Rather, it is the non-Muslim community that will stand up for the rights of the Muslim community. Civil organizations and advocacy groups, which are not Muslim advocacy groups, will fight and struggle for our rights more than we ourselves will struggle and fight for our rights. And that should be clear, is something very shameful. Okay? But you find that there is an apathy, there is an uneasiness for Muslims to get involved into politics. And generally speaking, when you ask somebody to get involved into politics, they do not think of politics as a religious responsibility. They do not think that one of the responsibilities of a Muslim is to be involved in politics. That person will say that my role in life is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be kind to those who are around me, to establish prayers and to give my zakat, and I don't have a role in life that is greater than that. Muslim centers should not be places where we talk about politics. The mimbar should not be a place where we talk about politics. In the Islamic center, our role is only to worship God. Our role is to establish salat, is to have rituals of Imam al-Hussein, is to commemorate history, is to talk about general ethics, but do not bring politics into the center. That is not the role of an Islamic center or an Islamic community, or not my responsibility as a Muslim. So we want to look at that today. And before we do that, I want to start first by analyzing what is politics. Because I think as a word, politics is very misunderstood within our community. I think we have a very negative connotation of politics, correct? Whenever you think about politics, you don't think about it positively. And when you think about politicians as well, you don't think about them very positively. If you are talking about somebody who's conniving, cheating, lying, deceiving, thinks about one thing, says another thing, and does a third thing, right? You will say, that man is a politician. And we think of politics generally as a very dirty word itself. Well, it turns out that not only politics is a good thing, politics is necessary. Human society cannot function without politics. Okay? Sociologists point out that conflict is a part of the human condition, and you will find conflict within human society. And the reason why you always see conflict is because, one, resources are limited. Land, energy, sustenance, water is limited. Secondly, there's always differences of opinion. There's going to be difference of opinion amongst individuals, either because of their agendas, either because of their motivations, either because of their interpretations, but they're going to have differences of opinion with each other. Some of you may have read a book called Robinson Crusoe. Yes? This man who was marooned on an island. Now, it's not a new book and not a new idea. The first person to actually write about a man who would be marooned on an island was Ibn Tufayl. He wrote a book, I believe 7 to 8 centuries ago, called Hayy ibn Yaqdhan, Alive Son of Awake. And the book was a novel, a story about a man who got marooned on an island and what he had to face over there. That has become now a text of sociology. All right? In any case, in the story in Robinson Crusoe, so just to demonstrate the point, when he got marooned, he was by himself. All of the land was his, the resources belonged to him. There was no conflict over there. And one good day, he found another person on that island, and he named him Good Friday. And after they found each other, suddenly there was conflict. There was a difference of opinion on how to make decisions, who should get the resources, what belongs to whom, and how should we make decisions as well. When you have two people, suddenly you start having conflicts. Now imagine when you have 1,000 people, or you have 1,000,000 people, or in the case of this country, you've got over 300 million people. Obviously, you're going to have conflict. So as a human society, we have decided that to overcome that conflict, we need to be able to have laws. We need to legislate laws. We need to pick leaders who will implement and execute those laws. We need to have law enforcement to make sure those laws are being followed. And we need to have courts that will make sure that the laws are being followed and that people's rights are also protected. The rights of the individual are weighed against the rights of the collective, and that their rights are protected as well. Well, that, how we govern ourselves, how we pick our leaders, that is called politics. Politics is necessary. Without politics, there would be chaos within human society. Societies would not function. All right? So it's not just a good thing, it is a necessary thing as well. Now, what does Islam say about politics and engagement in your society? There is a verse in the Quran in which God talks about why He sent prophets. And He says that we send prophets for the sake of, I know you'll find this hard to believe, but we send prophets for the sake of politics. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُولَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. We sent our messengers with bayinat. Bayinat is the plural of bayyinah. Bayyinah means proof. In this verse of the Quran, it means two things. Firstly, it means logical arguments. any prophet that we sent, we gave him rational and logical arguments by which he could argue his message. Secondly, bayyina also means miracles. Many prophets of God, when they were sent to their communities, in order to prove their prophethood, they brought miracles. We sent them with bayyinat. وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ, and we also revealed with them the book. It is very interesting in this verse of the Quran, even though we know that 4 or 5 books were revealed, there was Tawrat, there was Zabur, there was Injil, the Suhuf of Ibrahim, the Suhuf of Musa, there is the Quran. There were a number of books which were revealed, but God says we revealed the book, meaning that the reality of all those books was one, but they took different forms in different societies and different times. So we revealed the book. وَالْمِيزَانَ. Mizan means scale. In this verse of the Quran, Allama Tabatabai says, Mizan is actually referring to the Sharia. Prophets of God came with a Sharia. And the reason why Mizan is called Sharia or Sharia is called Mizan is because that is the standard by which I and you know whether our actions are correct or our actions are not correct. Now, God says we revealed miracles. We gave them logical arguments. We gave them the book. We gave them a Sharia. All of this for what purpose? لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, so that they may establish and organize societies on the basis of justice. Well, if that's not politics, then what is? Therefore, you find in the seerah of all the prophets and the seerah of our holy prophet, they were always engaged in their society. When Prophet Musa comes to his community, he does not only preach to them the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he also preaches against slavery, and he removes the Bani Israel from bondage and slavery. That is politics. When Prophet Shu'aib comes to his community, he doesn't just tell them to worship one God, but he also tells them that the way you do business is unethical, and he campaigns against that. When Prophet Yusuf comes to his people and he is in Misr, he not only teaches them about Tawheed, but he also advocates for the rights of the poor as well. Prophet Isa does the same thing. And our holy prophet, the mushrikeen had no problem with the Prophet of Allah. As long as he preached his own religion and told people to pray and fast, the mushrikeen would never have had a problem with the holy prophet. They had a problem with him because he started questioning some of their policies. He started questioning some of their traditions. When he saw that they were burying their daughters alive, the Prophet of Allah campaigned against that. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. When he saw that there was racism and prejudice, the Prophet of Allah did not remain quiet. Had he remained quiet, they had no problem with him. Had he said, like we say, that we're just going to remain in our masajid, we will pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and give zakat, the mushrikeen would have had no problem with him. But he said, no, we do not accept racism and discrimination. When he saw that the rights of women were taken from them, the Prophet of Allah advocated for their rights. You find the very same seerah, not only in the Prophet of Allah, but you find that seerah in the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam as well. Imam al-Husayn's movement was a political movement. Yes, it was not limited to a political movement, but it was also a political movement as well. It's a very beautiful dua that Imam al-Husayn makes when he is leaving one of the cities, Medina or Mecca, and he raises his hands to God and he says, Allahumma innaka ta'lam, oh my Lord, you know that if we are rising today, it is not because I want power or position. It's not because I want glory and fame for myself. وَلَكِنْ لِنَرِدَ الْمَعَالِمَ مِنْ دِينِكَ وَيَأْمَنُ الْمَظْلُومُونَ مِنْ عِبَادِكَ. Because we want to revive the teachings of your religion and we want to protect those who are oppressed amongst your servants. That's why he rose. And this is the very seerah that the Prophet of Allah expects us to have as a Muslim community. There's a beautiful hadith. And if you understand the hadith in its context, it becomes very relevant and very meaningful. Now, when I and you want to judge whether a person is a Muslim or he's not a Muslim, how do we judge? When that person says to us, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, we say that this person, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That this person is a Muslim. Even if I don't know what's in his heart, even if it seems that he's becoming a Muslim out of circumstance, because it is in his interest, I'm not allowed to question that. But what about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How does God judge whether I am a Muslim or not? Is it only because of my shahada? Is it only because of what I say? So now the hadith says, Man asbaha, if there ever comes a day in the life of a Muslim, لا يهتم بأمور المسلمين, he does not care about the affairs of other Muslims. He says to himself, I pray and I fast and I give zakat and and my family is doing well. We are in safety and in security. We are successful. Then I don't care about other Muslims. Look at what the hadith says. The hadith doesn't say that he is not a good Muslim. The hadith says, فَلَيْسَ بِهِ Muslim. This person is no longer a Muslim in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But still, you find that there is a lot of uneasiness within the Muslim community when we start talking about politics and political engagement. Their concerns, eyebrows are raised, people get uneasy. The first uneasiness is when you're talking about politics, are you talking about a Islamic political system? Are you talking about an Islamic government? Are you talking about a particular Islamic government? Are you trying to advocate for that? All right. No. We're just talking about that aspect of politics which is relevant to our communal experience in this society, which is directly relevant to us, how we can get involved in the issues which are around us. Another uneasiness within the Muslim community is there's a fear to talk about politics. If we talk about it, what's the media going to say to us? What are the neocons going to say to us? What are the people on the far right going to say to us? What will government agencies do to us? There is a significant fear in the Muslim community. And sometimes a person comes and says, well, if I go and express my political opinion in society, the society may come back to me and say that, well, if you don't like, because if I go out there and I'm critical of a particular party, I'm critical of their policies, or I'm critical of the government, somebody may come up to me and say to me that if you don't like the policies and if you don't like the government, then go back to the country where you came from, right? Isn't that what you hear? Yeah. Go back to the country where you came from. All right. A Muslim is not allowed to have an inferiority complex. A Muslim is a citizen of this land and is a part of this land like any other person. We came here we came here legally. We migrated here. We pay the taxes. We abide by the laws, and therefore we have the right to enjoy the liberties and the freedoms of this land just as anybody else has. Nobody should ever tell you that you need to go back to your land. Don't ever accept that. Okay? Somebody ever tells you that if you don't like the policies, you should go back to your land, you tell them, well, if you don't like what I have to say to you, what the law allows me to say to you, then why don't you go back to the land of your ancestors? We've got to have that confidence. Okay? Everybody here, no matter who they are immigrants to this land. Unless they are Native Americans, unless they are Aboriginals, and we are on the unceded territory of the native people of this land, unless they are those natives, they are immigrants, or their ancestors were immigrants, and there's no difference between us and no difference between them as either. It's also important that we should not be afraid to express our views. We have the right to express our views. I find it very surprising sometimes that certain people will be very proud to live in the land. And they will say, well, alhamdulillah, we live in a land where we have freedom. We have the liberty of expression. We have the freedom to express ourselves. We have the freedom to share our opinions and our perspectives. And then you test that freedom by voicing a critical voice, by saying something that they are uneasy about or society is uneasy about. And immediately they'll come and tell you what? Brother, let's keep it, let's calm down a little bit. Brother, if we do this, this is going to happen. Well, then where is that freedom of expression? Right? We have the right to express ourselves, let's not be afraid to express ourselves. And one of the scholars was once narrating an anecdote, and he was saying that somebody got onto a ship, and he paid for the ticket to get on, the ticket to get onto the ship. So he brought some food with him as well. And then as he was traveling, he would eat from that food. But he would not eat from the food that was being served on the ship. So somebody came and asked him and said, why are you not eating from that food? He said, no, brother, I only, I brought my own food with me, and I haven't paid for that food. So this other person said to him, no, actually, when you paid for the ticket, you also paid for the food as well. When you pay for your taxes, like everybody else does, then you also have the right to express yourself. When you are a legal citizen of this land, you have the right to express your views, even if they are uncomfortable within your society. The third point is that sometimes there's a narrow understanding of politics within our community. For us, politics sometimes is limited to foreign policy. And I have no doubt that the Palestinian issue is one of the most important issues that we have. And we need to advocate for it. But it's not the only issue, right? I have no doubt that, for example, Islamophobia is an important issue. We have been talking about it. We have to speak up against it. But that's not the only issue. Politics is not limited to that. Politics is more comprehensive than that. Right? We have an example in the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi afdalu salati wassalam. So the Imam during his Khalifate was involved in many battles, and he fought against many forms of oppression. In one hadith we're told that one day he was walking in the streets of Kufa. مَرَّ شَيْخٌ مَكْفُوفٌ كَبِيرٌ يَسْأَلُ. Suddenly a very old person passed by, and he was begging for food or begging for some money. فَقَالَ أَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ مَا هَذَا. The Imam asked, what is this? What is the scene that I see in front of me? His companions who are around him, فَقَالُوا, they say to him, نَصْرَانِيٌّ. You don't need to worry about him. He's just a Christian. Right? If he was a Muslim, we would have worried about him. He's just a Christian. And the Imam, as if to say, I did not ask you who he is. I ask you, what is the situation that I see in front of me? Whether it's a Muslim or a Christian, it is a concerning situation to me. It's something that I am concerned about. The Imam says, إِسْتَعْمَلْتُمُوهُ حَتَّى إِذَا كَبِرَ. You used him to build the Muslim community until he became an old man. And when he became an old man, مَنَعْتُمُوهُ أَنْفِقُ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ بَيْتِ الْمَالِ. Then you stopped helping him. No, give him money from the treasury of the Muslimin. Okay? How can I, in Canada, advocate for the rights of the Palestinian people who have been removed from their lands, but not advocate for the rights of the natives who also have been removed from their lands? How can I advocate against state brutality, which is happening in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia, but I don't care about the brutality faced by minorities and black people in this country? This is also inclusive in politics. Climate change is part of politics. Affordable housing is part of politics. Affordable healthcare is part of politics. Whether it affects the Muslim community or affects the entire community, this also is part of politics. Now, if that's the case, then the next question, probably one of the most sensitive questions then, is how do we get involved? And are we allowed to get involved in the political system within our lands? Or is that not permissible within Islam? In other words, am I allowed to vote? or am I not allowed to vote? Am I allowed to be a part? Am I allowed to run for office? Am I not allowed to run for office? Okay. So there seems to be two views within the Muslim community. There is a view which is a principalist approach, and there is a view which is a pragmatic approach. Let's start with the principalist approach, and we'll come to the pragmatic approach. The principalist approach says that we have principles in Islam, and we already have a political system within Islam. And that political system is called wilaya. Wilaya is not just a theory. Wilaya is a manner of governing society. In Islam, we believe that political authority and the right to exercise that authority belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the names of God is that He is Al-Waliyu, meaning He has that authority and that guardianship. Now the Quran tells us, إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. إِنَّمَا in Arabic is for exclusivity, meaning that your guardians, those who have authority over you, are only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the Prophet of Allah, meaning the one authorized by God, and then those who believe. Now, when it talks about those who believe, it says, الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَهُمْ راكعون. Those who establish prayers and they give their zakat in the state of doing ruku. And famously, it's talking about that moment when Amir al-Mu'mineen was in the state of salat and somebody came and asked him for sadaqah and the Imam gave his ring to him. In other words, wilaya, political authority, spiritual authority, belongs only to Allah, and then to the one authorized by God, meaning the Prophet of Allah, and then to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. So we have a political system in Islam. In fact, the whole concept of imamah is our concept of political system. I remember once speaking to our brother from the Ahl Sunnah, and he was telling me that whenever I speak to non-Muslims, I tell them that the difference between the Shia and the Sunnah is that the Sunnah believe that the ruler of the Muslim community, the political ruler of the Muslim community, that person should be elected by the people. Whereas the Shia believe that that person should be passed on from father to son, from generation to generation, like it is in a monarchy. And I tell them, he says, that historically speaking, democracy did not materialize, nor did the Shia system materialize. That's not correct. The Shias don't believe that imamah should be passed or khilafah should be passed from father to son or from son to, and then his son after him. We believe that the right to appoint a political leader is the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The imam is one who has been appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran is very explicit about this. Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama. When Prophet Ibrahim fulfilled all the tests that he was supposed to fulfill, God says to him, I am going to make you an imam, because that is the right of God. Therefore, you find interestingly, during the time of our imams, they would not allow their followers to participate in the government of the time. They would not allow their followers to participate in the system of their time. A follower would come to the imam and say, Yabna Rasulillah, am I allowed to build canals? Am I allowed to build structures, houses, bridges, roads for the existing government? And the imam said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Even if they gave me so much that it would fill whatever is between the heavens and the earth, I would not elongate the stroke of a pen for them. I would not tie the knot of a money bag for them. Somebody would come to the imam and say, Yabna Rasulillah, sometimes two of the believers, they have conflict with each other. Can they go to the justice system that has been established by the government of the time? And the imam would say, no, they can't do that. Now, I should mention over here that, yes, our scholars do say that if the only way to get your right is to use the court system, that is the existing court system, then it's okay, otherwise not. Okay. So the imam would say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Go to somebody who knows our ahadith, somebody who is learned in our fiqh, and let him decide between the two of you. So it would seem very clear that based on the principalist position, our theology teaches us that the right of forming government and the right of legislation and enforcing that legislation belongs to the Ahlul Bayt and those authorized by the Ahlul Bayt. That's the principalist position. Now let's come to the pragmatic position. The pragmatists say that, well, that is fine, but we also need to consider the situation within our society. That there are so many laws and policies influencing us, but we're not able to make an impact on those laws and policies. It affects our ability to practice our faith. It affects our ability to form communities. And that we actually have examples during the time of our Imams, when somebody would come to the Imam and ask for permission, and the Imam would give him permission. One of the companions of the seventh Imam was Ali bin Yaqtin. Ali bin Yaqtin was a very smart fellow, but he was hiding the fact that he was one of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. So one day Harun, the Abbasid Khalif, came to him and said, "Oh, Ali bin Yaqtin, I want to make you my minister of finance. And I want you to take care of financial matters for the Abbasid Khalif." Ali bin Yaqtin said, "Let me think about it." He went to the seventh Imam and he said, "Yabna Rasulillah, give me permission to excuse myself from this position. I don't want to help the Sultan." And the Imam said to him, "I don't give you permission. You have to take that position. And you have to take that post. And I promise you, as long as you promise me one thing, I will promise you three things. As long as you promise me that whenever one of our Shi'as comes for help to you, no matter where he comes, when he comes, how he comes, you're going to help him, I will promise you that you will not see the edge of a sword, nor will you see the roof of a prison." And one more thing the Imam promised him. Therefore, the pragmatist position would say that we can see that during the time of our Imams, there were certain times when they saw that it was in the maslahah and the interest of the Muslim community, they allowed their followers to participate within the system. And we agree, yes, that even in this day and age, we would need consent from our maraji of taqleed. And our maraji of taqleed, some of them have said that as long as the experts and the scholars in your area deem it under the masalih and the interest of the Muslim community, and that's the only way of acquiring the interest of the Muslim community, then you can participate within the system. This doesn't mean that you're saying that this is a system that is theologically correct with the system that I believe in. This doesn't mean that I accept all the laws of the system either. Yes, I have to abide by the laws. Okay? But I may have a disagreement about certain laws, and I may want to advocate for changes within those laws. But having all those caveats in mind, then I'm going to say that I should be involved within the political system. So the question now you're going to ask me is, do we take the pragmatist position or do we take the principalist position? That's not a decision for me to make. That's for a decision for you to make. You have to speak to the scholars and the experts within your country. I'm not from America, right? You have to speak to the experts and the scholars in your country and see what they have to say to you, and make a decision as a community or as an individual within that community. What I do want to point out is that sometimes one of the misconceptions that we have is that the only way to effect political change is through the ballot box, is by getting involved in elections, by casting my vote one day that comes every 4 years. And that's probably one of the most insignificant ways of affecting political change. You may argue it is important, and it just may be important, but it is not one of the most significant ways of affecting political change. There are other ways as well. And I want to talk about 3 ways before we end today's presentation, inshallah. If you recite the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So first, I think it's important for the Muslim community to raise awareness about issues, to be aware and to raise awareness, to write, to write to newspapers, to write letters to the editor, to write editorials as experts, to blog, to give interviews, to become experts in a field and then partake in forums and discussions on radio shows and on TV shows as well. But the problem in the Muslim community sometimes is that we have a mind that very quickly inclines towards conspiracy theories. Yeah? If you want a conspiracy theory to gain track, the first place you would come to is the Muslim community. We have amazing conspiracy theories. This is how the media works. This is how the government, this is why this incident happened. Sometimes there's not even evidence to base it on, but we've got a conspiracy theory to go with it. And sometimes I wonder why we incline towards conspiracy theories. Is it because we don't like to take responsibility for our situation? Is it because we just want to be apathetic to the political situation, and the best way to justify our apathy is to say, well, no, brother, whatever you do, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to be able to make a difference. Okay? No, we can make a difference. Nobody can tell me today that if I write a letter to the editor, it's not going to get published. Yes, if you write something to Fox News, it's not going to get published. But besides Fox News, there are other channels, there are other newspapers where they will get published. And if you want examples, I can give you examples of Muslims who have written very critical pieces, critical of the system, critical sometimes of certain policies, and it has gotten published. There are Muslims who have gone on radio shows and TV shows and expressed their views and raised awareness about those views. Secondly, we also need to get involved in organizations that advocate for civil rights. We need to get involved in organizations that do social welfare, either to get involved in those organizations or for us to make alliances with them. Okay? By ourselves, as one community, we may not be able to effect change. But if we come together as Shia communities, and not just as Shia communities, but as Muslim communities, not just as Muslim communities, but as faith-based communities, or communities and groups that share certain values, we can effect change. In fact, working with other groups was one of the seerahs of the Holy Prophet, whether he was in Mecca or whether he was in Medina. Let me give you an example of Medina. So in Medina, when the Prophet of Allah first came over there, some of the tribes were Muslim tribes. And some of these tribes were mushrikeen. And some of the tribes were Jewish tribes. So towards the end of the Prophet's life, he wrote a letter. He wrote a letter to the people of Najran, and he wrote a letter to some of these other tribes as well. And he invited them to join Islam. Right? And in the case of the Christians in Najran, they sent a delegation to him. And this delegation came, and they argued with the Prophet of Allah, and they were not convinced. They engaged in mubahala with the Holy Prophet, and then they pulled out of that mubahala. So now, they have decided that they are not going to become Muslims. Now that they are not going to become Muslims, what should the Prophet of Allah do with them? Just take their jizya and ignore them otherwise? The Quran says no. The Quran says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. Say, O people of the book, come. Now that you're not going to become Muslims, then let us at least work on the basis of those things which are common to both of us. That we don't associate any partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allama Tabatabai says, it's not just about not associating partners to God, but rather it's also about establishing justice in your communities. During the early days of Islam, when the Prophet of Allah came to Medina, amongst the first things that he did, and you want to go online and research this, is he signed a charter known as the Charter of Medina. Back then, they didn't used to have constitutions. So what they would do is they would enshrine the rights of minorities and the rights of these tribes within agreements that they used to make. The Prophet of Allah made an agreement with some of the Jewish tribes in Medina, and the agreement was that now that the agreement has been made, the Jewish people of Medina and the Muslims are now one nation. They will help each other. The Muslims will practice their faith, Jewish people will practice their faith. If the Jewish tribes ever need help from the Muslims will come to their aid. And if the Muslims ever need help, the Jewish tribes will join them as well. This was the alliance that the Prophet of Allah formed with them. So we need to start forming these alliances, be part of these civil rights organizations, and advocate for our common rights. And the third thing that we should also not be afraid to do is to protest. Right? If we think that there is a law that is unethical, a law that is wrong, a policy that is wrong, along with raising awareness, along with forming alliances, we should also get involved in protesting as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Another salawat. Tonight we would like to remember the tragedy of Al-Abbas alayhi salam. Hadrat Abbas was not only the brother of Imam al-Hussein, he was the standard bearer of Imam al-Hussein's army. Hadrat Abbas is also known as Babul Hawa'ij. Whenever people have needs, whenever they have haja, they do tawassul to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Hadrat Abbas, and they find that their needs are answered. They find that God responds to them. Hadrat Abbas was not only a loyal companion and brother to Imam al-Hussein, but the sixth Imam says, كان عمنا العباس نافذ البصيرة صلب الإيمان. Our uncle Al-Abbas had piercing vision and sight, and he was strong in his faith. Tonight we want to remember him. Let us take our hearts to Bayn al-Haramain, between the Haram of Abbas and Hussein. Tonight, as we gaze at the Haram of Al-Abbas, as we think about his shrine, let us do tawassul to Imam al-Hussein. يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين ابن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. One of the qualities of Al-Abbas, as we said, was his loyalty to Imam al-Hussein, and the fact that he believed in the values and the movement of Imam al-Hussein. The narrator says that the cursed Shimr entered the plains of Karbala on the 9th day of Muharram. He brought 2 letters, one for Umar ibn Sa'd, and the other he brought towards the camp of Imam al-Hussein. And he came towards the tents of Imam al-Hussein, and he called out to them, and he said, أين بنو أختي عبد الله وجعفر والعباس وعثمان? Where are the children of my sister? Calling out to the children of al-Banin, because al-Banin came from the same tribe as him. He said, where are the children of my sister? And he named them, but Al-Abbas did not respond to him. He never took a step ahead of Imam al-Hussein. He was never a step behind Imam al-Hussein. The Imam said to Al-Abbas, why don't you answer him, even if he is a wretched person? So Al-Abbas came out, and he said to him, Shimr, what do you want from me? Shimr said to him, I have brought a letter for you. This letter, it guarantees your safety. As long as you don't fight for Al-Hussein, as long as you don't fight in the plains of Karbala, as long as you leave this campsite and you don't fight against us tomorrow, you and your brothers are in aman, you are in safety, and no harm will come to you. Al-Abbas looked at him and said, there should be safety for me and for my brothers, and there should be no safety for the son of Fatima. We do not accept that from you. May Allah chop off your hands, and may Allah curse the safety that you have brought for us. And he did not accept it. The next day, on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein made him the standard bearer of his army. He was the one who led the middle flank of Imam al-Hussein's army. He fought bravely on the day of Ashura. He encouraged many on the field of battle. But finally a moment came on the afternoon of Ashura when there were only two people left. There was Imam al-Hussein and there was Al-Abbas. And Al-Abbas heard the Imam calling out, هل من ناصر ينصرنا هل من مغيث يغيثنا. So Al-Abbas came to Imam al-Hussein and he said to him, Ya akhi, he said to him, O my brother, allow me to go to the battlefield. Imam al-Hussein said to him, how can I let you go when you are the standard bearer of my army? Ya akhi anta hamilu liwa'i, you are the standard bearer of my army. But Al-Abbas said to him, قد ضاق صدري وسئمت من الحياة. O Hussein, my chest feels constrained and I am satiated from life. Then allow me to go to the battlefield and let me protect you and protect your family on this day. But as Al-Abbas went to the battlefield, he admonished the enemies. He gave a sermon to the enemies. Imam al-Hussein said to him, O Abbas, go to the battlefield and get some water for Lady Sakina. Get some water for Ali al-Asghar. So Al-Abbas went to them and he said, we're asking for a little bit of water for the children of Al-Hussein. The enemy Umar ibn Sa'ad said to him, O Abbas, even if we had all the water on the face of this earth, we would not give you one drop of water. We would not allow you to taste any water. Al-Abbas came back. He said to Imam al-Hussein, there will not be giving you any water. But then he could hear the cries of the children. He could hear the cries of Sakina. Just imagine how hot it was on that day. Just imagine how thirsty the children were. The narrator says, when Ali al-Akbar was fighting, after a while he came back from the battlefield and he said, Ya abati, al-atashu qad qatalani. Oh my dear father, the thirst is killing me. Now just imagine on that day, the thirst of Ali al-Asghar, the thirst of the children of Imam al-Hussein. So he heard them calling out, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. So he went towards the battlefield and he took a water flask with him. He reached the river of Furat. He filled it with water. Then he picked up a little bit of water. He looked at the water that was in front of him. And then he knew about the thirst of Sakina, the thirst of Al-Hussein. He knew about the thirst of the children of Al-Hussein. So he said at that time, Ya nafsu min ba'd al-Husayn huni فبعده ما كنت أن تكوني. Oh my soul, what is the point to life after Al-Hussein? Who would want to live after Al-Hussein? هذا حسين وارد المنون وتشربين بارد المعين تالله ما هذا فعال ديني. This is Al-Hussein. He is surrounded by his enemies. How can a soul think of drinking water? He threw the water back to Furat. He now went back towards the tent of Al-Hussein. I am not sure what Abbas was thinking of. Maybe he was remembering Lady Sakina. Maybe he was remembering Ali al-Asghar. And he called out to them. He said, نفسي لصبت المصطفى الطهر وقى إني أنا العباس أغدو بالسقا. If you don't know who I am Al-Abbas. I am known as the one who quenches the thirst. Oh Abbas, we are thirsty as well. We are thirsty for the rahmah of Allah. We are thirsty for the forgiveness of Allah. We're thirsty to look at the Imam of our time. Oh Abbas, quench our thirst as well. He was going back towards the tents of Imam al-Hussein. He fought off many of the enemies, but alas, one of the enemies came close to Al-Abbas. He chopped off the right arm of Abbas. He took the water flask in his left hand and he called out to Imam al-Hussein. Well, he called out to the enemies as well. He said, Wallahi in qata'tumu yamini inni uhami abadan an dini. Even if you cut off my right arm, I will continue to protect my religion. I will continue to protect Imam al-Hussein. Al-Abbas continued to go towards the tent. As long as there was water with him, he continued to go towards the tent. Another of the enemies came from behind. He chopped off the left arm of Abbas. He said, he cried out, قَدْ قَطَعُوا بِبَغْيِهِمْ يَسَارِي. They have chopped off my left arm. But Al-Abbas continued to go towards the tent. As long as there was water with him, he continued to go towards the tent. But there came a moment when one of the enemies aimed an arrow at a water bag of Abbas, and it pierced the water bag of Abbas. Another enemy aimed a spear at the face of Abbas, and it pierced into the eyes of Abbas. He fell to the plains of Karbala, and he called out to Imam al-Hussein, Assalamu alayk, Ya Aba Abdillah. These are now the last salams of Abbas. These are the last salams of your brother to you. Imam al-Hussein, he came very quickly to the body of Abbas. He got off his horse. He sat down near Abbas. He put the head of Abbas on his laps. He cleared the blood from the face of Abbas. But when he saw the state of his brother, he called out at that moment, Al-an inkasara dhahri. Now my back is broken. وَقَلَّتْ حِيلَتِي. Now I have no more plots and stratagems. That was a time when Imam al-Hussein felt very lonely on the plains of Karbala. There was no one left with him. Now he's coming back towards the tent. How does he tell Lady Zainab that your brother is no more? How does he tell Lady Sakina that your uncle is no more? How is he supposed to tell them? So he comes towards the tents of Abbas and he demolishes the tent of Abbas and he says to them, Al-Abbas is وسيعلم الذين